Welcome to the I Love New Mexico podcast. Those of you who are followers know that what we talk about here is anything and everything that has to do with New Mexico. If you've never listened to the podcast before, welcome and thank you for being a part of this. This is a really special place where we don't really have any boundaries about the things that we discuss, the subjects that we cover. What I'm most interested in is telling stories and hearing stories from people who have made a big difference in both their own lives and in New Mexico in general. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to my friend Barbara McCullough. Barbara is an artist who started out elsewhere and who has this um, fascinating history of being a technical artist before, a technical drawer, illustrator. And so I want you to stick around because you're going to be interested in hearing Barbara's personal story and her New Mexico story. So, Barbara, thank you for coming back. We did this once before for a different podcast, didn't we?
We did, Bunny. We were talking about gratitude, and I have so much gratitude and grateful for this opportunity to talk about New Mexico and how it's helped fuel and propel my journey as an artist. You
Eh, Go ahead. I'm sorry. You go
you
ahead.
were talking about technical illustration. Right out of high school, I did not have the opportunity to go to college. But what I did was I answered an ad for a line artist, and I had always liked to draw, and it turned into a job in Phoenix in technical illustration, which I did for 15 years. And I had my own little Jeep, and I love the outdoors, and I've always been a hiker, and just kind of nothing could stop me. And I was always coming over to New Mexico, and I'd slide over to Silver City when it was just nothing but mountain sheep. And I just loved New Mexico. I love Santa Fe. And after about 15 years doing boring, excuse me, technical
Well,
illustration.
hang on. I want folks to know who you were doing those technical illustrations for because it's kind of a big deal.
Sure, I had a secret clearance and I was doing work for NASA. So, and the
That's
government,
cool.
yeah, it was cool. It was cool. I was very well paid for a woman in those days. That was a long time ago because I'm 78 years old as of last week. So this was from 65 to 1980. So it was a long, long time. And when women really didn't have the opportunity to have good jobs, and this was a good job. And I saved every penny I could to get back up to my home state of Montana, where I was certain I could have a horse. I mean, that was it. I wanted a horse and I wanted the freedom to get dirty because technical illustration was just precise, it was clean, it kept me in a tight little box working hard and making money. And I needed some freedom and some beauty in my life. And I moved to Montana. I took my pennies and moved to the highest mountain I could, got the horse, opened a pottery because that was a skill that I had developed on the side. And I was able to find that I could sell my pots in galleries and in the gift stores up at Glacier Park. And
I love this part of your story because we all, and I've had these conversations before with people who are artists at heart, but they do these jobs that aren't really, I mean, a lot of us do jobs for years that don't feed our souls, but like my friend Mary Mirabal, who did the same thing. She was in a C-suite in the corporate world, and she was like, I'm just going to save my money
mhm,
until the moment when I can do nothing but art all day long. It sounds like that's how it works.
it was. And I thought it was heaven. I was a mountain woman. I lived by myself on top of a mountain wood heat in my house and down in the pottery, 4 horses, a well. It was, I mean, it was glorious. It was also, it was also hard. It was hard work. And I saw people paint, and they were more creative, and I was wearing mud all day long and all night because I'd set my alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning so that I could get down to the pottery and adjust the burners on the big kiln that I had made. And I saw artists with studio galleries in the little tourist town off the mountain, and I thought, and this was 10 years that I was a potter, and I said, I could do that because I can draw. And I had taught myself through a book of how to do watercolor, putting little tints of color on top of my drawings of wildlife. Those little drawings framed, I took them to the galleries that sold my pots, and they sold them. And I thought, okay, I had unfortunately, no children. I had no husband to worry about. It was me, and I found homes for my horses. So the risk was minimal. The reward was just too huge to say no to. So I found a buyer for my pottery, my horses, my land, and I moved off the mountain and opened this tiny little room down in a tourist town and hung up a sign, Barbara Watercolor Studio Gallery. And I was there for 7 years. And this was 1990. This was when I became a painter. And my my work was exciting to me for quite a while. I would be outdoors, I'd hike all through Glacier, I would teach people how to do watercolor. Um, I was like Mama Duck in Glacier Park, and they'd advertise me, and I'd have little watercolor students following behind me, and we would just hike all over the park and paint. And it was through Glacier Field Services. And that was nice. And as my business with the gallery grew, my ability to develop as an artist shrunk because everyone wanted the same thing, the same look, the same thing, and often the same view. They wanted that spot where they had picnicked that they loved, and so they'd commission me to do it and to do their red barns in the snow. And that was fine. Again, I was making money, but I was shrinking up so much inside, I was getting depressed, terribly depressed, because I saw no way out for me. The people that I saw around me had the college degrees. They were getting national recognition. They were doing this and going there, and I'm sitting there paying the bills, working hours and hours and paying the bills and not growing. And I saw someone with another gallery with a box of wine on the back counter. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. And it turned out not to be a great idea because I've got the genetics of enthusiasm. And if I'm doing art, I'm enthusiastic. If I'm drinking, I'm enthusiastic. Well, the two did not work together. And drinking for me caused me to be more depressed. It wasn't a solution, it was a problem. And so after a few years, I needed to quit completely. And I did with some help. And I have to say, yesterday in New Mexico, I celebrated 23 years of not drinking.
I,
And it was so great. I was out under the blue sky in northern New Mexico, walking around Georgia O'Keeffe's stomping grounds and just leaving my little prayer rock at the old adobe church up there. And, you know,
Barbara,
it,
that really that warms my soul. I love that story. That is
thank
so
you.
amazing because we talked about that before. And we
Mhm.
talked about how you had to sort of learn again how to be grateful after that really significant struggle in your life,
It
right?
was because what I had to do, I had to learn other artists could stay in the groove and achieve national recognition because they would keep improving their skills in a narrow lane. I'm not built that way. I'm curious. And so it took me that breakdown, that break in my pattern to really understand who this person was. And this person is a curious person. And what it meant was, I am driven to experiment and try this kind of art and that kind of art and this media and just push my path wide instead of narrow. It has meant professionally, I did not achieve that, that rocket to stardom, if you want, for an artist to get national recognition. But what it did was it fed my soul, and I developed a very wide repertoire. I can I can pull things out of my experience drawers when I need them. And that helps me as an artist. It also helps me as an instructor or just simply talking to artists because they start realizing that I've got a background with whatever they're looking for almost,
I
and
you have this wide body of work,
mhm,
but it's not just, sometimes people will say, "Well, that's really wide, but not very deep." Yours is wide, and it is very deep because you're you I mean, this sounds cheesy to somebody who's listening perhaps, but you really have your heart and soul in every piece that you create, it
mhm,
seems to me.
I
I mean, I'm
do.
looking at the one that I own that is on the wall right here in this room where I do it's not in the room where I do the recording, it's out in the hall, but it's of the, church at Las Golondrinas, I believe, and so you create these images that are look very iconically Northern New Mexico. And then I'm looking at you in your studio and you do these beautiful contemporary looking abstracts. I just, you, you, I don't know. I don't know.
Body.
It feels like you're a national star to me, but, um, I love your work. So, tell folks how you ended up in New Mexico, and then I want to talk for a minute about your book.
Okay. When so I started painting in Montana, I got sober, and that led to me having a breakup in a relationship and the wisdom to leave Montana. And so I moved to Colorado. I moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, a nice little hometown with a lot of trees and a river going through it. And although I had no interest in a relationship, I met a guy. And the guy that I met 20 years ago, we got married, and he was a philosophy professor there at CSU. The side benefit was he had a job, which is, I mean, for an artist, we're always counting pennies or juggling or figuring out how many shows we can pack in, how we can do this thing, especially as a self-employed artist. Well, here I married a man who he has a job and he's supportive and I love him to pieces. And that of course, as you know, is what's critical. But when he every school break, we would pack up and go hiking someplace. All through Colorado, we'd come down to New Mexico, we'd come down to Santa Fe so that I could immerse myself in art. And we would rent a little casita there downtown for a week, and I would go around the galleries, and then we would hike, and I'd do my field studies. over and over again. And in 2018, I inadvertently, in the spring break, talked to a man who had a gallery on Canyon Road and mentioned to him that I was a painter. And he was curious and he said, "Well, I'd love to see your work." And I said, "Well, I've got three paintings in the car, and he said, "Bring them in." One thing led to the other. And in 2018, I had my first solo show on Canyon Road. Yeah, thanks, Brad Smith, the gallery just on the north side of El Faro. And so I'm very grateful to Brad for that. Michael and I were sitting on the porch towards the end of my show, and he said, "Well, I retire next year. Let's do it. Let's just move here."
Oh,
And
that's
I
so
said, "Oh,
cool.
yeah, you can't leave your kids. It was like too big. It was too magical. It was too hard to imagine a dream like that coming true. I thought, well, I'll just go back to my day to day routine there in Colorado, which was fine. It was wonderful. It just wasn't Santa Fe. It wasn't New Mexico. And so you're a realtor. I started looking through Zillow every back home for months, and I'd keep pulling up homes in our price range and just teasing him, saying, "Oh, here's our home, and here's our home, and here's our home." Every time I found something charming.
Mhm.
And I pulled this one up and said, "Oh, here it is. Hey, I kind of like this one. It's got trees out front and it meets all the criteria." And he said, "Well, why don't you call the realtor?" And I thought he said, "Why don't you buy the house?"
Of course you did. That's
And
what you wanted to hear.
that's right. And so I did. I called the realtor. She asked if I wanted to make an offer because three people already had. And I said, "Well, yes, I'll offer exactly what they're asking for, but we'll take it as is." And she said, "Okay, well, I'll give you a call back." And she called back and said, "We've had five people and they picked you." And she said, "But I need money in 2 days." And this was November. So I jump in the car and my hands are on the steering wheel. It's sleeting, of course, in Colorado on the freeway. And I didn't take my hands off the steering wheel except for one bathroom stop to get down there and give her that earnest money in hand. But I got to the house 15 minutes before she did, walked around it and said, "Oh, this is great. It's got a nice western view and da da da." And, it's quite natural, which I loved, and quiet.
Mhm.
And she came and she opens the door and she said, "Well, it's all been refurbished and this and that." And she said, "Let's walk through." And I said, "Please, can we see the garage?" And she laughed and she said, "You must be an artist." And because there were no windows and I couldn't see my future studio online.
Mhm.
And I walked in, and it has three skylights. It was wired for LEDs, it was insulated, and a laundry room sink. I mean, it was like manna from heaven. It was my studio.
It was your house with your studio. I love
Right.
that.
Right. And I said, "Please take my money." I'm buying this. And the rest is history. I cleaned it up. But New Mexico is the state that I need to be. It's perfect in my retirement years. It's not my retirement years, Michael's retirement years.
You're
But
still working.
I am still working. I'm so excited about the work that I do, and I'm talking a
Tell
lot. It's your turn.
Well, I that's because you have such an amazing story, but you wrote a book,
I did.
and and the amazing thing, I can't think of her first name now, but you got a blurb from or a foreword from, I'm sorry, her last name is Cameron, that wrote The Artist's Way.
Yeah, Julia Cameron put me in another book. that she wrote called Finding Wisdom. And she used my story to open up her first chapter in that book.
It's
And
it's so amazing. When we did this podcast before, when we spoke before and we talked more about the gratitude piece and more about the struggles that you had had and how you had gotten to this place of immense gratitude in your life. But you said, and that's what inspired me to call you to do this, is that from my notes that I took during that podcast, you said that you felt like you needed to always live in with an attitude of learning. I mean, you talked about curiosity before in this podcast, but you have this really curious spirit that's open to learning. And I'm sure that's what she saw. I'm sure that's why she included you. Julia Cameron. Yeah.
and she has a sense of humor.
That's well, I don't think that's why she included you,
I
but
sat down at the Red Enchilada, and she taped me and used that for her story. But I know I had her laughing, but it was heartfelt. And when you've passed a little bit of time from difficult experiences, it's easier to look back at them in a fuller framework and see if it hadn't been for that, this could not have happened.
I
And
feel that way too.
yeah,
Yes.
and gratitude is that it's that connection with the magic, whatever we believe spiritually, it's that magic that we tap into, that source that says just be available, just be
Oh,
available. And I'm so available. And when the pandemic came, I couldn't teach because I couldn't teach. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I guess I can just stay in my studio and paint and order groceries in, and in a few months this will all be over, which of course it wasn't. And that winter, I started thinking, well, I'm going to make some notes about being a teacher, about those things that I talked to my students about, and some notes about developing their insides first so that it speeds up your whole process. Because I learned from experience, I didn't tap into who I was. I tapped into what I could do and worked very hard on it, but I didn't know me. And until I knew who I was, I couldn't really put it together. And so the beginning of this book that I wrote, the first part of it is little matrices, nothing psychological because I don't carry those degrees, but just the wisdom of helping people discover who they are as a person who might become an artist, whether they already are or not, so that they can speed up that journey, so they don't have to take so many years like I did, or go down, you know, chasing the dollars, and think you're doing the right thing by grinding out that job. Um, so
What's
then
what's the name of your book, Barbara?
the name of my book, and here of course here's a book, The Unstoppable Artist. And it's not about me being an unstoppable artist, it's about helping people become unstoppable by discovering the artist inside themselves. And these little things on the cover, I won 3 awards for it as a writer. And Bunny, that that just felt so bizarre because, again, I did not go to college. There's things that I could have done maybe if I'd gone to college, and yeah, I don't know, but I loved writing. And so I put together the best book I could, and the main part of the book is lessons. It's 55 projects guiding someone, no matter whether they want to jump into acrylic or oil or life drawing or field studies. There's sections there for that particular topic, taking it as if that person had never experienced it before, so that somebody can just open the book and say, hey, I want to learn about field studies. And there's, you know, everything I could put in it.
It's very tactical, right? It's not ethereal, it's not a bunch of theories. It is Barbara saying, "If this is the thing you wanna do, here are the steps to try it," right?
Exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is so a lot of bad things happened during the pandemic, but out of it came you and I publishing these books. So,
Oh, no.
it's crazy to me. Well, so Barbara, I want folks to know that in the show notes, we have links to your website, your Instagram account, and to where they can find your book.
Mhm.
Where are you showing your work these days?
I'm showing my work. I'm represented by a gallery on Canyon Road in Santa Fe, which is, I mean, I couldn't ask for a better location. And the gallery that represents me is called, the name of the gallery is Art Is, meaning art just is. Art is
Right?
gallery. And their address is 419 Canyon Road. But the reason they are such a perfect fit, Mika and William Rotzart are Belgium, and sweet, kind, curious, accepting people. And they allow me the freedom to follow whatever muse is calling me, and if it doesn't work in the gallery, it doesn't work in the gallery. But they so many galleries are looking to create a business and put their artists in categories and keep those artists in categories. And so I lucked out and ended up in the gallery that says, oh, well, just follow your heart, follow your creativity. And
That's so perfect for you.
it's been
It's
a
so
won-
I mean, and it's also perfect for the consumer because my taste in art is different than your taste in art is different than I mean, I can't imagine wanting to put artists into a box. So congratulations for being there. Yeah. And what's next for you?
well, what's next for me very specifically is next Saturday the 19th. Canyon Road does events, and they have an twice a year they do their paint outs, a spring paint out and a fall paint out. And I'm advertised and will be participating in the fall paint out as an oil portrait painter. So I'm pulling that from another drawer, and I have one willing subject, and I'm always open for another one, Bunny, to sit for me for an hour while I create and demonstrate how to do oil portraits.
I would love to do that. How fun would that be? Yeah. And
Good.
Barbara, this is hard for me because you and I, we love to visit and we could do this for an hour, but we do have to stop.
I see that.
So, um, but I can't wait to see you on Saturday on Canyon Road at the Art Is Gallery, and I want folks to find you. So everybody, take a look at the show notes, and please take a look at Barbara's work because you're going to love it. Thank you for being on the podcast, Barbara.
Thank you for inviting me, Bonnie. I just love anything we can do together.
I agree. I agree.